Before I begin my sermon today, I feel like I should put a disclaimer at the start of it because I felt like no one would actually believe the following stories from my childhood were real. I hate to admit it, but they are. See, as a child, I don't necessarily think I would have been characterized as the spawn of Satan, but I hardly think people were saying, that kid's going to be a pastor someday. The general consensus was more like, oh, just wait until he has kids of his own. See, I had a very active imagination and a sense for adventure, and sometimes that got me in a little bit of trouble. So much so that my parents made sure to inform my elderly babysitter to call the cops if I ever disappeared. For example, there was the time I decided to play hide and seek with my babysitter. I accidentally forgot to tell her I was playing hide and seek. So I sat in the bathtub, shower curtain drawn tight, waiting for her to find me. When she finally opened the bathroom door and called my name out, I thought, you're going to have to try harder than that. So I remained silent as she closed the bathroom door. Time went on and I just sat in that tub grinning at how good I was at hiding. Finally, I heard the door open. The shower curtain was pulled open, and there was a policeman looking down at me. Excitedly, I pointed at him and said, "It's your turn to hide." My mom's here today, and I'm pretty sure there'll be a number of people after the service consoling her, saying, "I don't know how you did it." As I said, these disappearing acts of mine were a regular occurrence, so it shouldn't shock anyone that when our dog Jake ran out the front door one day, I followed along. I instinctively felt that it was a sense of duty to return our dog to his rightful home. And I followed this dog everywhere, past condos and stores and homes and a nursing home and other places. And finally, Jake stopped and sat down in the grass, so I cozied up next to him and had the frightening revelation that I didn't know where we were. Glancing around at the buildings, nothing seemed familiar to me. "Jake," I said, tears starting to form in my eyes, "I let you down. I've gotten us lost. Mom and Dad are never going to see us again." Jake sniffed the air, took in his surroundings, and in no time at all, he was on his feet. I got up to chase after him again and slowly realized we were right across the street from my house. And as the sun began to set and we made our way back toward the house, I saw a search party of my family and neighbors walking down the block with flashlights. "Jake, we are really going to get it this time." It's amazing how we can be looking at something in plain sight and be unable to see it for what it really is. My mind knew I was lost, so all the buildings around me couldn't possibly be the ones I was so used to. The readings from last week and today focus on a handful of people who had a similar trouble seeing things in front of them. On Easter, Pastor Kim spoke about Mary Magdalene, who encountered Jesus at the empty tomb. Because she believed Jesus to be dead, she figured the man in front of her had to be the gardener. It was only when Jesus called out her name that Mary focused and saw the teacher in front of her. Today's gospel reading continues that same chapter in the book of John. This time we find a bunch of the disciples hiding out in a room with all the doors locked. They saw how the crowds turned against Jesus, and they knew a similar fate was in store for them if they continued doing the work they had been doing. So they make sure no one is getting in this house. Well, no one but Jesus. Somehow out of nowhere, their old teacher and friend is standing in the room with them. Imagine how you might feel if your previously dead friend just showed up inside a locked room with you. That's why Jesus tells them, "Peace be with you," which by today's standards might translate to, "Chill out." He offers the disciples proof it's really him by showing them the wounds in his hands and his side. So all of a sudden, they're able to relax now. They're finally able to see who's standing in front of them. Once the disciples have truly seen Jesus, they're ready to listen. It's here that Jesus prepares them for the work ahead. Now, as we heard, eventually Thomas, the only one not with the group, meets up with the others. On TV, I've seen this actually depicted as Thomas entering the room while Jesus is still in there with them. And one of the disciples goes, "Yo, Thomas, look who's here." And of course, by that point, Jesus has pulled one of those Batman disappearing acts on them. However long it took Thomas to rejoin the group, it's pretty safe to say he thought his friends were out of their minds. Couldn't you see someone like Thomas in today's world? His friends are all talking about this big, important event that just happened, and he refuses to acknowledge their viewpoint. Maybe the disciples are all online on Facebook spreading the good news. Christ is alive, #resurrection. And there's Thomas at his computer saying, "How can these guys think like that? I swear, if they keep this up, I'm unfriending all of them." Thomas is very clear. He will only believe them on his terms. Unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands and put my finger in that mark and my hand in his side, I will not believe, he says. Are we that different than Thomas sometimes? Do we sometimes not dismiss what others are saying unless it fits our definition of the truth? Thankfully, in Thomas's case, he's willing to rejoin the conversation. He meets up with the other disciples a week after this last encounter, and this time Jesus appears before him. Jesus even meets his demands for belief. "See the wounds on my hand, touch my side. Don't doubt but believe," he says. When we keep ourselves closed off, when we refuse to see any other perspective other than our own, we render the people around us invisible. And I have a feeling most of us have experienced both sides of this. Sometimes we may be guilty of closing ourselves off, and other times we're the ones being shut out. The Reverend Gregory Ellison calls this being cut dead, a term which comes from 19th century philosopher and psychologist William James, who wrote, "If no one turned around when we entered, answered when we spoke, reminded what we did, but if every person we met cut us dead and acted as if we were non-existent things, a kind of rage and impotent despair would before long well up in us, from which only the cruelest bodily torture would be a relief." Did you catch that? He said even the cruelest bodily torture would be a relief from being invisible. When we as human beings begin to feel like we're no longer seen or acknowledged by those around us, our lives go one of two ways. Some of us lose hope, fading away from the world. Others lash out, sometimes violently, because negative attention feels better than no attention at all. Going back to my childhood for a moment, I too felt invisible at one point in my life. I wouldn't say I was cut dead, but I remember feeling like adults just passed by me or didn't listen to what I had to say. And so I did the only thing I could think of to get attention. I pretended to faint. Of course, it got my parents' attention, as they worried, what could cause a fainting spell like this? So having been successful in my first attempt, I proceeded to faint some more, until finally, they brought me to the hospital, where the doctors could hopefully figure out what was going on. I sat down as the doctor gave me some medicine. "We're going to give you an MRI, he told me. "This will help you sleep through it." Well, time dragged on and that medicine was not kicking in. Finally, the doctors just gave up and put me in the machine, awake. "You'll just hear some banging noises, nothing to be afraid of," they said. As it turned out, the MRI was over quickly, and before I knew it, I was walking out that lobby with my dad. I started to wonder if being noticed by people was really worth all this trouble. It was about that moment the medicine finally kicked in. My body went limp, and I passed out in my dad's arms. When I woke up, I was on the couch at home with a bunch of my family members looking down at me. They started handing me presents and asking, "Are you okay?" Did it feel good to be invisible? Or did it feel good to no longer be invisible? You bet. Think about a time when someone made you feel seen and not invisible. Remember how it felt? How can we spread that feeling to other people? Gregory Ellison, who I talked about a little before, has started a new movement that he's teaching throughout the country. He calls it Fearless Dialogues. He's bringing together people from all walks of life, CEOs, drug dealers, teachers, plenty of other people. And he and his volunteers greet all participants the same way. It is good to finally see you. Are you ready for change? Notice the order of that. It is good to finally see you. Before any real change can occur, we have to be willing to see one another. One method Ellison and his team used to help with this is called the long, loving look at the real. Two partners sit down in front of one another, and partner A is asked to look lovingly in the eyes of partner B for 90 seconds, complete strangers. After this, the partners switch, and partner B is asked to stare lovingly in the eyes of partner A. When this exchange is over, the partners are asked to take a moment to consider 3 questions. Who did you see? Who didn't you hear? Where is hope? And those 3 questions they find bring out amazing results. Several years ago, as a co-leader of our junior youth group, Melissa had introduced an experiment to our youth. A full-length mirror was propped up against the wall. Each member was asked to walk up to the mirror, look into it, and say what they saw reflected back at them. The answers came back from themselves. I see someone short, someone with glasses, someone with blonde hair, and so on. Then the youth were asked to go back up to the mirror. But this time the others in the group had to say what they saw in the mirror. Now the answers came back. I see joy, creativity, sadness, an artist, playfulness, shyness. As they gazed into the mirror, our youth realized there was so much more to one another and ourselves when we stopped to take a long, loving look. And outside the confines of Fearless Dialogues or the junior youth group, we probably won't be gazing lovingly for 90 seconds at too many strangers on the street. But I think the principle of these exercises still rings true for our everyday lives. Rather than ignoring people with different opinions, rather than limiting our conversations to people who only act and think like us, we can take a moment to look at them and see who's reflected back. As Ellison once said, after gazing in the mirrored eyes of a stranger and seeing oneself, it becomes exceedingly hard to objectify, devalue, and dehumanize. I'd like to end by bringing us back to that room with Jesus and the disciples. After the group finally believes it's Jesus standing before them, he says, "As the Father sent me, so I send you." He sends them out into the world to become a force for change, to heal those who their society has cut dead. I would like to send you out into the world today with a challenge of your own. This challenge used by the Fearless Dialogue people originated when Gregory Ellison was just a boy. He asked his Aunt Dottie how he could change the world. She replied, "Baby, I don't know how to change the world, but I can change the 3 feet in front of me." 3 feet. When you leave church today, could you see the lives and hear the stories of just 3 people who cross your 3 feet? What would it really mean if you had to actually see the homeless man asking you for change, or the tired mother juggling a bunch of kids in the checkout line? Once you've gazed at the people who cross your path, you realize they're just as much a child of God as you are, with the same God-given potential. And once you allow yourself to see, you cannot not see. Margaret Mead once said, "Never doubt that a small group of committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." I challenge you today to change your world, to change our world, if only 3 feet at a time. Amen.